Hello, everyone. My name is James, and I'm 28 years old. I've been wanting to tell this story for a long time, to get rid of this feeling on my chest and so that I'll finally be able to sleep again. Ever since then, I've been getting nightmares, and no amount of therapy is helping the severe amount of trauma I gained working at Walmart. Okay, let's go to the beginning. It was around June of 2023. I'm not going to get much into the details, but I was jobless, broke, and in desperate need of money. If I didn't get a dream, I would most likely lose my house, and that was the last thing I needed to happen. The sun was late into setting, and I was walking back home through the dimly lit streets, not too long before I would make it back my home. But then, as I was walking, I walked past a poster which I was just barely able to read the word job in my peripheral vision. But now I wish that I did end up walking past it. I picked up the poster from the telephone pole it was attached to. In bold and red letters it said, "Looking for valuable and passionate workers to man the security job. Great pay, low hours, and health insurance." When I looked down at the bottom corner of the page, I couldn't help but get suspicious when I read the word Walmart. Walmart and free healthcare? That was obviously a lie. Now, even though I was suspect of the poster, I was in grave need of money. So, of course, I subconsciously decided to take the job, which was if they hired me. One strange thing I did notice, though, is that the address next to the phone number wasn't the Walmart about a couple of blocks down from where I was currently standing. But the address was for a Walmart 10 miles away from where I was just standing. Nevertheless, I would have to find a way, as I had already made up my mind on taking up the job. I would have to buy a bicycle because there was no way I was walking about 13 miles from home. Fortunately for me, I do remember having an electric scooter that's just been sitting down in my basement. If I'm lucky, I could be able to get it to work again. I folded the poster up and placed it in my pocket, continuing on my way home. As soon as I got home, I was confronted by my dog, Shanks, in the poor condition of my home. I named him Shanks based off of a character from one of my favorite shows. Without my dog, I'm not sure I would still be around to this day. My dog leaped onto my leg, barking and wagging his tail excitedly. I couldn't help but gain a wide smile as I crouched down to pet him profusely. After I was done petting Shanks, I walked past him and entered my basement. I flipped the light on the side of me, turning on the basement light. The light flickered and buzzed erratically, submerging me in darkness, if only for moments. I looked over to the other side of the basement, seeing my old electric scooter sitting in the corner. It had taken quite a beating over these years down here sitting in the basement. I grabbed the electric scooter, wiping away dust and webs from it. I checked the battery, and it surprisingly wasn't dead. It was pretty much storing all the energy it had from when I last charged it. Now, I just needed to see if it actually worked. Lo and behold, it could actually move. Of course, there are some things, such as the wheel not turning properly when the handle is moved, but at least it still worked. I finally contacted the number on the poster, which I was then put in hold for a couple of minutes. When they put me back on the line, they told me to introduce myself, which I did. Afterwards, they began asking me really obscure and weird questions such as, "What's your favorite color? Do you have frequent nightmares? And are you prone to auditory and visual hallucinations?" I didn't understand why they were asking these questions. I had to second check if I called the right number. It was at this point that I began recording the call just in case. After I had answered all those questions, it led me to an automated voice message that was supposed to explain the terms and conditions of the job I had to accept if I wanted. However, the voice at times were either too fast or unintelligible, making it so I couldn't understand anything of what they just said. It then told me to press 1 if I agreed to whatever jumbo it said. I didn't have much of a choice then, so of course, I pressed 1. Afterwards, the phone abruptly hung up, sending me back to my home screen. Soon after, I got a message by an unknown number. It was as read, "Congratulations on getting the security job. Please refer to the location on the poster." See you at 11 tomorrow. I was really skeptical of the message. That felt way too easy, but I brushed it off as them being desperate for a security worker. The next day I woke up around 9:30. I stayed up and sleep-deprived myself so I could wake up and make it there on time. I rode my scooter over to the address on the poster. After about an hour and 30 minutes, I found myself in the parking lot of Walmart. The parking lot was barren. There were almost no cars in sight. As I walked in, I was immediately greeted by a woman in a suit. She smiled widely from cheek to cheek, but it didn't feel like a real smile. How happy can you be working at Walmart? It was extremely unsettling. Hey, you must be here for the security job. Yes, I responded, slightly confused. Great, then follow me. I followed the woman in the suit further into the building, eventually finding myself in the back of the Walmart. She then introduced me to someone named Carson, who would tell me everything about the room and what to do. However, I only got to see him one time that day before getting thrown into the shift blind. Oh, so fortunate for me, the company forces co-workers to exchange numbers with each other. Since I'm security, I only had to give my number to Carson. Now on to why I made this in the first place. It had hit 12 on the clock. I finally settled in and was wearing the usual black security jacket with security written on it. It was 11 and it was only 10 minutes into my shift until I realized something strange. I couldn't seem to find a security office, those rooms with cameras. Well, I wouldn't know about this later until I was informed that there was, in fact, no security office. As if I wasn't already feeling uneasy, I was basically dawdling about in the open expanse of Walmart, alone. The lights were still on for some reason, so my ears was constantly showered with the humming and buzzing of lights. Did I mention the extreme cold? Oh God, it was so cold in there. I could see the smoke leaving my mouth clearly. I eventually ended up walking around through the aisles wrapped in a giant blanket like a little kid. Around 11:30, Carson called me unexpectedly. I answered the call, first clearing my throat to speak properly. Hello? I didn't get a response for a couple of seconds before I heard Carson's voice on the other side of the phone. Oh, hey, okay. So I'm here to tell you what to do and whatnot. The tone in his voice when he said was nonchalant, almost like he couldn't care or was too bothered to make the call. You should know the basics of security. I mean, you have watched Mall Cop, right? Yeah, But before I could finish my sentence, he cut me off. Good. So don't let anyone in. That's the basic gist of your job. At 12, make sure to lock the front doors. Don't worry about any other unlocked doors. They will resolve themselves. Also, keep in mind that the lights doesn't actually turn off until around 2, so you have plenty of time. Oh yeah, if you see any strange figures walking around in the store, then just ignore them. I don't quite understand it either, but those are people just practicing night vision tech. I remember the manager saying something about a contract, but that's about all I know. Then without warning, he just hung up. I wanted to ask him more questions, especially about the strange figures, seeing as he kind of brushed them off like it was normal. The contract part too was skeptical to me. Why is Walmart having contracts with military or whatever? What the hell is this company? I could remember mumbling to myself. The time was now 12 noon and I swiftly walked over to the front doors and locked them. It was just as he said, the lights hadn't turned off yet. And with nothing to do, of course, I resorted to walking around the store. There was an entire section with laptops and games I could play. Unfortunately, the consoles were locked and couldn't be accessed without a key, unlike the laptops. Occasionally, I would go over there to play games on a laptop if I got bored. Eventually, I got hungry, so I ransacked some snacks off of the shelves. I thought that surely they wouldn't care, right? Then the snacks started to become temporary, and my body was aching for actual food now. Fortunately, I could grab a microwave and hook it up to an outlet to eat up any microwavable frozen food I could find in the freezer, like Jamaican beef patties or occasionally ramen noodles. Also, I should mention that I was able to use my phone to screen cast movies on one of the display televisions. It only worked for that Sony TV for some reason. The time was now 1:30, and I was comfortably cozy laying on a king-size bed, fully adorned with a blanket too. I watch movies on my phone while I wait for the clock to hit 2 o'clock. The movie I was watching was Inception, an all-time favorite movie of mine. It's not a detail you needed to know, but I felt like sharing it anyways. And then it finally hit 2 o'clock. As soon as it hit 2 o'clock, all the lights turned off simultaneously, including my phone that restarted entirely. Additionally, as this was happening, I started hearing random loud whirring and humming noises from the front doors, accompanied by bright flashing lights of random colors. Then it all abruptly stopped. I turned on my phone and looked at the time. It was completely wrong. The time was 20:06, which I'm sure was impossible unless my phone had restarted and been default set for 24-hour time. And I brushed it off as just that. I tried to continue watching my movie in peace, but my phone didn't work, connected to the building Wi-Fi or using data. I got up from the comforts of my bed and went to check the laptops and TVs. And as you could expect, those were also disabled or not functioning properly. In fact, the Sony TV from before was the only TV to actually even turn on. As I was inspecting the electronics to make sure it just wasn't one section, I suddenly spot a strange figure walking around in the darkness. With a closer look, I could see that the figure was wearing some gear, and I subconsciously noted that these were the night vision PPL that Carson was talking about. Despite specifically remembering him telling me not to approach them, I did the opposite against my ever-growing curiosity. I walked up behind the figure, tapping him on the shoulder. The figure turned around, letting out a little grunt in confusion. "Hi?" "Oh." I tried to greet them. They responded with nothing but silence for a couple of seconds before actually speaking. "Sorry, I'm just so confused. I've never seen a person in here before." Something was wrong with their voice. It sounded echoey, but at the same time it didn't. I know there was something wrong, but at the same time, it felt like I was viewing something at the wrong angle. I don't know how to explain it. I was trying to understand what the figure was, but my brain and body was simultaneously confused. It was incomprehensible. "You mean there weren't any other security guards?" I asked them. The static sound signaling one of the TVs turning on caused me to turn around and look at it. And when I turned back around, the figure was gone. My heart dropped in my chest. It was a fear I haven't had in a long time. Back from all the way when I was 6 and I saw a man standing over my unconscious body. I hadn't felt so alone in a Walmart. It felt like I was being suffocated by the silent ambience of the Walmart. I quickly ran to the back of the Walmart, locking myself in a room and crouching down in one of the corners in complete and utter terror. After God knows long of whimpering on the corner, I grew some balls and stood up, taking a deep breath to compose myself and calm my shaking body. I flipped on the light of the room I was in, which means that the power doesn't get cut off at 2 on like the lights. With the lights on, I could see the things inside the room. The room had boxes of tapes and even its own VCR. It felt reminiscent of the videotape room I'd occasionally go to back at school. As I browsed through the videotapes, one specifically caught my eye. A tape named Security Training. It seemed to be a videotape meant to train new security guards on what to do and what not to do. But it must have been never used, or haven't been used since something happened. It's most likely why they have real people train you instead. Anyways, I grabbed the tape and threw it into the VCR, sitting down as it booted up. Once it fully booted up, I was greeted by a blank blue screen with a jam playing in the background. It was like one of those upbeat jams that you'd heard in '99. 2000s advertisements trying to be hip with the kids. Except that the music was out of tune and there would be missing notes. It was unnerving. Then this yellow smiley face appeared on the screen, smiling from cheek to cheek. For simplicity, I'm going to call it Smiley. After Smiley appeared on the screen, a robotic voice could be heard accompanied with yellow text on the bottom. "Hello, welcome to the first day on the job." Its voice suddenly was bleeped out as it presumed to say a name I couldn't recognize. Here at Walmart, many customers rely on us to buy through us necessities and entertainment. You only have 3 things to do while on the security job. Smiley disappeared from the screen afterwards, and the blue background switched to a still image of an empty Walmart. Soon afterwards, a stickman appeared on screen, wearing a hat labeled security. Number 1, after locking the doors at 12 p.m., do not let anyone inside the building under any circumstances. If there is anyone in the building after you lock the doors, then do not let them leave under any circumstances. Another stickman came into appearance, being colored purple in order to separate itself from the original black stickman. Number 2, do not approach the figures walking around the store after 2 o'clock. They will have gear on them. Specifically, night goggles will be the most noticeable. They do not know you are there. You will frighten them. This is what Carson was talking about, but I had forgotten about the detail of the night goggles for some reason. It's a detail I'm sure that I wouldn't forget. The scene switched, now showing a still image of a room with a row of monitors sitting on a desk. Number 3, keep your eyes on the camera for any suspicious activity. If you see something you deem as suspicious, then mark it down on a note for higher-ups review. This tape had to be quite old, as there wasn't a security room to watch the cameras from, or the fact that there weren't even any cameras here to begin with. It makes sense as things change, the tape became redundant and outdated information. Number 4. Number 4? I thought there were only 3 things we had to do. The videotape didn't stop for my train of thought, however, and continued. The screen turned pitch black, showing Smiley once again, except his bright big smile was now gone. In fact, he didn't even have a mouth anymore, as he just stared directly through the screen. It was staring at me. The voice and music was gone, only leaving me with the yellow text below. "Hi, we know where you are, James." My heart dropped in my chest as my mind recognized what the videotape was saying. I swiftly turned the VCR off and stood up to also turn the light off. I crouched down in the corner of the room, holding my breath and closing my eyes tight in terror. I could feel the tears beginning to well up in my eyes. The only thing I could think about was my dog Shanks and how much I missed him right now. After a couple of minutes of sobbing and shaking uncontrollably, I could hear the sound of a dog barking echoing throughout the building. I listened attentively, noticing that the barking was coming from one of the aisles close to me. Then suddenly I hear the back doors swing wide open with a loud bang. I feared the worst as I could hear footsteps approaching the room I was in. Then silence. I held my breath in anticipation, my heart beating out of my chest. Then something happened, but it wasn't what I expected. A husky burst through the door, barking at me. It still gave me quite a fright, but was nowhere near as bad as what I was thinking. The husky walked up to me, laying down on my lap. It reminded me of Shanks and brought me my much-needed comfort that I didn't even think about how the husky got inside first. I checked the phone on my time, which wasn't even numbers now. I began petting the husky, finding some joy in this alone and cold building. I couldn't help but feel like falling asleep, and without knowing, I ended up dozing off. I woke up the next morning in the same room, but the husky was gone. Additionally, all those videotapes were gone, including the VQ. I stood up, wiping some saliva off my mouth. I checked the time. It was now 7:30. I exited the back rooms of Walmart and went to the front doors. I looked out through the doors and had never been so happy feeling the sun on my skin. I could see some cars start to pull up. Specifically, the only one I could actually recognize was Carson, who had gotten out of his car first. I swiftly unlocked the front doors, walking out to greet him. My body was still slightly shaking as I walked towards him, and I felt pale in many places. As I came face to face with Carson, I couldn't control myself and hugged him tightly. It was pathetic, really, but I had never felt so alone and scared. It felt like I was a kid all over again. "Whoa, are you okay, man?" he said, gently pushing me away. I wiped away some tears welling in my eyes before turning back towards a Carson. Ye, yeah, I'm fine, I replied, composing myself. Good, because you're pale. I chuckled slightly before getting serious again. Carson, listen, can we talk about something? Carson quickly turned back toward me, his eyebrows furrowing. He grabbed my arm, pulling me closer so I could hear what he would say. Not here. You have my phone number, right? Then call me once you get home. I nodded as he let me go, sinister. He walked into the Walmart, leaving me to stand outside the building alone. Unfortunately, I have to go somewhere, like right now. When I see you again, I'll gather up the recordings I've created so far and publish them. Hello, everyone. It is great to see you again. It's been a while since my last post, and now I have some time to continue where I left off. By the way, if you hadn't seen the last post, then click on the link above in order to get caught up. Besides that, things haven't been looking so bad anymore. I've gotten a new job as a truck delivery guy and the pay is stable, so all is going well. Though I have been getting some strange messages from an unknown number, but I'm not sure if I should share them here or not. All right, where were we? And a little graphic warning. Once I got home, I immediately called Carson, still distraught from what happened back at the Walmart. I called him a couple of times, but I was only met with his voicemail. But that's when I called him for one more time, and he finally answered. Carson speaking. Who is it? Carson! I called you like 4 times, I shouted in slight annoyance. Yeah, I was busy. I swiftly composed myself, taking deep breaths in order to try and soothe my rapidly beating heart. I opened my mouth to ask him a question, but getting caught in my throat as I struggled to ask him or not. Eventually, I gripped my teeth to ask him, finding the awkward silence more unbearable. Carson, what the hell is going on with that Walmart? Carson didn't say anything for a couple of seconds, seemingly trying to find the right words for it, but failing. I don't know either. The only thing I do know is that we aren't supposed to know. Why aren't we supposed to know? Once again, he went into silence for a couple of minutes before finally speaking up. I can't tell you that. As far as I knew, I had no one else to trust but Carson. I knew nothing of the other employees, and I definitely didn't want to associate myself with that creepy, smiling woman in the suit, so I just had to take Carson's word that he couldn't tell me for some odd reason. Look, I found this security tape. Why? But before I could finish my sentence, Carson interrupted me, sounding shocked. He also sounded somewhat distraught about the fact that I had found a security tape. You found a security tape? Yeah, it was labeled security training and there was Smiley, this yellow smiley face. And then he interrupted me once again, sounding slightly frustrated. No, you weren't supposed to find that tape. It shouldn't have even been possible for you to find it. I couldn't understand what could have happened associated with this tape that it was completely dropped years ago. Isn't it used? I asked in quick breaths. I could hear Carson's sigh on the other side of the phone before taking a deep breath to compose himself. Listen, that tape was lost all the way back in 2002. Less of lost and more of destroyed, I would know as I watched it happen. If it was destroyed, then why was it in the back rooms of the Walmart, completely preserved? All these questions just made it more confusing to me about the weird things happening at Walmart after 2 If you truly did find that security tape, then I need you to do me a favor. I replied, yeah. What is it? On tomorrow's shift, I need you to find the tape and bring it out with you when the sun rises again. Can you do that? I thought for a couple of minutes. I wanted to uncover the mystery of Walmart, but I was also terrified by the idea of going back inside there, going back inside that nightmare of a supermarket. Nevertheless, I agreed to do his favor. Uh, okay. Soon after I said that, he hung up. However, my curiosity and confusion hadn't been satiated. So of course, I would do some researching myself. Surfing through the web, I would find some details about Walmart that wasn't necessarily what I was looking for, but was still something to note, such as the fact that Smiley here was a mascot of Walmart until 2006, which is around the same time that Carson said the tape was supposedly destroyed at. Around that time, there were articles of people worldwide supposedly seeing Smiley in their dreams. There was even a whole website about it, but I could care less about that. After a while of searching, I did find something. Inputting the address of the Walmart I worked at, which was Madisonville, KY, led me to an article. According to the article, the Walmart there was the first ever Walmart to be built in Kentucky. However, it was shut down due to a sinkhole from mining around the area. This article just proven to me that the company doesn't want me to know about these articles or the background behind the Walmart, avoiding questions and wording things differently in order to keep some tight secret on something. Searching about the sinkhole or the mining brought me completely irrelevant results to no results at all. After realizing I wouldn't be able to get any more information searching online, I would have had to do it in person. And I already had an idea on what to do: cameras. Now I know that sometime after 2 electronic devices either refuse to work or don't function properly. But it means I could catch some footage before that happens. Specifically, I thought of this idea to safely view what the hell was happening at the entrance once it hit 2 o'clock. So I ordered all the cameras I needed and thank God for same-day delivery, or I wouldn't have video proof of the hell to come. And now all I had to do was wait. I was extremely tired thanks to last night's events, so I decided to take a quick nap. But that would have to come right after I feed Shanks. Shanks! I called for Shanks, holding a bag of dog food. Soon Shanks came running after me, panting and wagging his tail excitedly. I poured food in his dog bowl, much to his enjoyment. Afterwards, I lay down in my bed, feeling my eyelids becoming heavy as I got comfortable. And then I fell asleep. There was nothing but darkness for what felt like an eternity before I suddenly found myself in a crowed Walmart. I looked around in confusion. My surroundings feel disconnected and blurry. It felt like I wasn't really there. I looked at my hands, noticing that they weren't actually my hands. I was wearing a costume. With this realization, it became hard for me to breathe. My breath was becoming raspy and short. I clawed at the costume head, desperately trying to get it off, with no avail. Soon, the people in the building noticed my frantic clawing at the head and soon realized I was panicking. Why can't I take the costume off? I remember thinking to myself. I fell to my knees, trying to pull my head off. As people surrounded me, I still clawed at my head, blood starting to squirm out the neck of the costume, filling it with the grotesque smell of rotting flesh and blood. I let out a horrible long screech as I grabbed my eye sockets, pulling it down with all my strength. I could feel the unbearable pain of my eyes popping out and my skin tearing off in the area I was pulling down my sockets. And then I woke up. I sat up with a yelp, drenched in sweat. I breathed heavily, trying to compose myself, but I couldn't. I was really freaked out by that nightmare, whatever it was supposed to be. I soon calmed down, however, seeing Shanks laying next to me sleeping peacefully. But every time I close my eyes, I can faintly see Smiley just staring at me. I checked the time. It was 9 o'clock, so I still had some time to chill and relax. But I definitely wouldn't be going back to sleep after that nightmare I just had. Then I remembered the cameras I ordered earlier should have arrived at around 8:30, and I hurriedly got up to see if it had finally came. When I opened the door, there it was, a box sitting here on my front porch. I took the box inside and swiftly opened it, seeing the cameras inside laid about like they were just hurled in there. I didn't mind though, as long as they still worked. Soon the time became 10 a.m. and it was time for me to leave. I grabbed all of my cameras and placed them in a backpack. Afterwards, I hopped on my scooter and began driving towards Walmart. I made it there a little bit earlier than usual at 10:45. As I walked through the entrance, I was greeted by Carson, who grabbed my shoulder on the way out. "Remember what you have to do." I nodded to him, continuing on into the Walmart. At 11 o'clock, I clocked in and was now wearing my security outfit. I couldn't forget the hat, of course. With the time I still had, I began setting up cameras around the place and activating them, which weirdly enough, my co-workers didn't care and ignored me while I was setting up all the cameras. After a couple of minutes, I had placed every camera I had and turned them on. Soon, the clock hit 12 o'clock and I swiftly locked the door. The first thing I did afterwards was immediately look for a weapon. I definitely wasn't doing that bullshit again, at least without a weapon. Now, I wasn't sure if Walmart had any swords or anything, nor would I even able to use it efficiently. One thing I did know is that they had baseball bats. Lo and behold, I was able to find myself a metal baseball bat. Holding it in my hands made me feel so much more confident, like I could take on anything. I decided to ignore the back rooms of the Walmart completely, as it wouldn't matter until the clock hit 2 o'clock. Waiting for the time to pass, I watched movies and occasionally played games on my phone. It felt even longer this time and seemed like it wouldn't even hit 1:30. But eventually, after God knows how long, it was finally 2 o'clock. Like last time, I started hearing random loud whirring and humming noises from the entrance, accompanied by bright flashing lights of random colors. Again, my phone refused to work until the rainbow epileptic attack at the entrance abruptly stopped. It was time again. I knew what I had to do. Avoid any strange figures and make it into the back to find the tape. But when I tried my usual route to the back, the aisles kept on going. I didn't notice it until the walk turned from minutes into nearly an hour. It was then I noticed something was up. I turned on my heels, glancing back. The entrance seemed to fade into the distance, obscured by the seemingly endless aisles that appeared to stretch for what felt like a mile. My body wanted to run, my legs shaking underneath my weight, but I couldn't run now. Not when I had a job to do. I really regretted not buying a flashlight so I could somewhat see. Nevertheless, I had to continue on. I traversed through the near pitch-black aisles that didn't seem to end, the sound of my footsteps echoing throughout the empty expanse of Walmart. After a couple minutes of walking with no results, I suddenly encountered one of those strange figures. It was too dark to try and describe their features. It just stood there. The sounds of occasional items being shoved around in the aisles near me added more to my unease. I remember Carson saying not to approach them, and even though nothing happened last time when I did, it felt like something terrible would happen if I approached the figure. But before I could do anything, the figure suddenly turned to me in an instant, its white glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. It said one thing, its voice distorted and eerily monotone. "Hello?" I froze, my fight-or-flight instincts not working. With a loud slap of feet, the dark figure suddenly appeared in front of me, staring me down. Its glowing bright eyes felt like I was looking into a white void. It repeated itself again, tilting its head to the side. My body finally decided to move as I gripped my baseball bat and attempted to hit the figure in its side. However, it didn't budge. Now, sure, I wasn't exactly fit by definition, but I wasn't weak. So the fact that this thing just shrugged off the blow filled me with pure terror. I could feel the adrenaline course through my veins as my muscles tensed, ready for action. Without warning, the lights suddenly turned on, but they weren't the same as before. The fluorescent lights were now bright red. If the earlier shit had me contemplating running, then this one certainly put me into action. I hopped over one of the shelves, climbing over it frantically in mere moments. I sprinted down the aisles as they became narrower the more I ran for my life. From behind me, I could hear a creature run on all four of its legs, knocking over and charging through aisles in an attempt to catch me. I continued running faster than I had ever before, the shelves starting to close in on me as there seemed to be no end to these aisles. I could hear the loud thumping of the creature behind me get progressively louder. From the other side of the shelves, I could hear people laughing hysterically as the monster screeched a horrible symphony. My hope was restored as I see a men's bathroom sign in the far distance, like a shining ray in contrast to the dark and eerie red lights illuminating the entire building. With one final burst of energy, I dashed towards the bathroom and dived head first, making it inside as I could hear the monster crash against the wall and screech in pain. I stood up, my entire body aching in pain. The bathroom smelled absolutely fucking terrible, accompanied with shit left in the toilet and penis drawings on the wall, which is the most normal thing I've seen so far. I looked at myself in the mirror, taking the time to notice how much of a mess I was. But then, that's when I noticed that the mirror wasn't copying my exact movements, sending a chill down my spine. I stared at me, and I stared back. I leaned in and slowly brought my finger against the glass mirror, trying to see what happened against my instincts. Then without warning, it, or the other version of me, grabbed me through the mirror before suddenly dragging me inside. I grunted as my back smacked hard against the bathroom wall, tears beginning to well up in my eyes. I caressed my back, trying to soothe the pain. "Yep, I deserve that," I said in a hushed whisper. The other version of me was now gone, leaving me on the other side of this mirror realm. It wasn't until then that I noticed that I hadn't hit the floor yet. I was just floating against the bathroom wall in zero gravity. My body didn't like that either, as I could feel something churning up in my stomach. However, there was no point in whining about it, so I dealt with the pain. I pushed myself off of the wall, propelling towards the bathroom door. With little effort, I pushed the door open and found myself in this black void. Something caught my eye, though. A glowing videotape hovering above a concrete pedestal. I thought to myself that had to be it, and I began floating over to the tape, reaching out for it. However, just before I could grab the tape, a force suddenly pushed me back, causing me to slam against the wall. I landed on a floating piece of rubble, trying to catch my breath. I could hear faint laughter, almost as if this place was playing with me. The gravity had changed now, becoming low gravity. The tape was now way farther back, a trail of floating rubble leading up to it. Through the pain, I stood up, starting to make my way towards the tape. My legs shook with every step I take, the sounds of my feet stepping on rubble echoing throughout the pitch-black void. But once again, before I could reach it, I could suddenly feel my body stretch backward as I was suddenly hurled backwards into the void. I screamed as I flopped through the air, falling in nothingness for a couple of seconds before smacking against cold dirt without warning. My surroundings were different again, like the place was always changing. I had now found myself with what seemed to be an abandoned underground mine. The only thing that seemed to be holding up the place was shabby wooden supports. I stood up, making sure not to stand up too fast to not hurt myself anymore. I looked around, just noticing that my metal baseball bat was missing. Well, there goes my only form of protection in this place. Nevertheless, I had to continue on. I walked through the dark and dimly lit hallways of the mine, the only light in this place being a small lantern hanging on the wooden supports. The place seemed like a maze. It felt like I was walking in circles. After a couple minutes of walking, I turned and came across a skeleton sitting against the wall, giving quite a fright. There was a writing in blood on the wall which simply said, "It burns." But it didn't feel like the person who died had written that. Instead, it felt like this place was mocking him, writing down what he screamed as he supposedly burned to death from something unknown. Seriously freaked out, I kept on walking. Just then I could hear the rattling of bones, causing me to turn around swiftly in response. My heart felt like it was in my throat as I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came. The skeleton was now facing towards me, directly looking up at me. I hurriedly turned around, running for my life, the sounds of my footsteps echoing throughout the abandoned mine. I stopped when I eventually ran out of breath, and now I had absolutely no clue where I was, if I didn't know beforehand. I had no other choice but to keep on walking, surely better than just standing around. After walking for a couple of more minutes, I came upon this metal door, just embedded inside the wall. On the side of the door, was a keypad. With seemingly no other way of progressing, I tried my luck on the keypad, and I got it first try because the code was free. The door made a clicking sound, signifying that it was now unlocked. I opened the door and walked through, shivering as I was blasted by the intense cold of this facility. Yeah, apparently there was just a whole facility sitting underneath the Walmart. No idea of what the purpose of it would be for, but I continued inside nonetheless. This place was even colder than Walmart. That I was sure I would get frostbite if I stayed down here for too long. The constant humming of the lights above didn't help either, with the small amount of heat they were producing and that maddening sound. On a desk, I found a shredded note card which I could barely read, but I was able to understand two words. The moon? What could the moon have to do with this? Still, I decided to keep it, stuffing it in my pocket as I found it interesting. As I continued exploring the facility, I found many strange things, such as a room filled with nothing but beds, a chair trapped in a cube of pillows, and a giant drawing of the moon with little light rays radiating out of it. What any of it meant, I had no clue. Then, in one of the rooms, there sat down on a table a videotape. I quickly lunged for it, wasting no time to grab it before some weird shit happened that causes it to get away from me again. I looked at the label, and for sure, this was the videotape. And now all I had to do was leave. As I left the room, I couldn't help but get the terrible feeling that I was being watched. As I made my way towards the door I came through, large amounts of some black goo suddenly fell from the ceiling, blocking the doorway. I tripped back in a fright, nearly falling, but I was able to save myself. Even from where I was standing, I was able to feel the sheer intensity of the heat exuding off of it, warming my body in seconds. "What the hell?" I yelped, trying to figure out what the hell that black goop was. But I didn't have any time to think, as without warning, the black goop grew and stretched toward me at an insane speed. I was just barely able to duck as the goop grazed past my head, nearly taking it off. I ran through the door at full speed, the walls now adorned with skeletons hanging on metal hooks. They all turned to look at me as I sprinted forward down the hallway. By some miracle, I was able to find the hole I fell through, looking at the void. However, the black goop soon followed after me, engulfing the walls of the mine. The ground it consumed as it charged towards me became a lake of intense heat. That would also cause the mine to shake, as the searing black goop would end up burning the wooden supports holding it up. Either way, if I wouldn't be able to get out, I would either be crushed or burned to death. I began desperately climbing the wall, scratching myself and accidentally stabbing myself sometimes with how frantically I was climbing. But I slipped up on one of the rocks and fall back down to the ground, landing on my ankle wrong and spraining it. I shouted in pain, holding my ankle while holding tears back. I looked back, seeing that the goop was now only a couple seconds away from touching me. I reached my hand out into the air, hopelessly wishing that through all odds someone would grab me and pull me out of here, even though I knew that was impossible. But just then, I could see a metal baseball bat peering through the darkness, coming just close enough to where I could grab it. Then something pulled me up, saving me just before the black goop touched me. They pulled with a little more strength this time, and I landed in the back rooms of the Walmart on my butt. I breathed heavily, my ankle throbbing in pain. Wow, that was close, yeah? A voice rung out. At first I thought it was Carson, but as I turned towards them to thank them, it wasn't Carson. Instead, it was a woman I've never seen before, but she somehow felt like familiar. I just stared at her, trying to comprehend what has happened, but I must have stared for too long as she spoke up. Hey, are you okay? I snapped out of it, realizing that it was awkward. Yeah, yeah, I'm fine, thank you. No problem. I sat up against the wall, grunting in pain as my ankle scraped against the ground. She crouched down to take a look at my ankle, noticing I was in some pain. You hurt yourself up pretty bad, didn't you? I just fell and sprained my ankle. It's no biggie, really. I looked away, trying to shrug off the pain. I sat in awkward silence for a couple of seconds before speaking up. What's your name? She turned towards me, a bit surprised at the question. She opened her mouth, but said nothing, as if she was trying to think something up. I'm Melissa. My name is Melissa. The way she dragged out that pause made me almost certain that she made the name up, but it would have to wait for now as I had another and more important question to ask. Melissa, how did you even get in here? She said nothing. I didn't believe she was a liar, though. I just think that she might be confused on where she was. With my current knowledge, I just had to chalk it up that she was somehow in the building once I locked the doors at 12 o'clock. She stood up, taking a few steps towards the door. Look, I'm going to go get something for that sprained ankles of yours. Wait, I reached out for her. I wanted to tell her not to leave me, but then I realized how pathetic that sounded and put my arm down. Never mind. And with that, she left, leaving me alone in the back rooms of Walmart. After a couple of minutes of just sitting there, Melissa eventually came back holding something large in her arms. Well, I couldn't find anything for your ankle, but I did find something else instead. Now I could see what she was holding more clearly. It was a husky identical to the husky I saw on my last shift. The husky barked and walked up to me, panting and wagging his tail excitedly. It's you again. I pet the husky profusely, my mood once again rising in his presence. Thanks. I turned towards Melissa, letting a faint smile slip my lips. She chuckled and looked proud of herself for what she had done. Hey, no biggie, right? She would then suddenly look around, her face having the faintest of worry. This place makes me uneasy. We should get out of here. I nodded, slowly standing up so I didn't hurt my ankle even more. She helped me walk out of the back rooms, the husky following right behind us as we made our way towards the entrance. Now, I know we weren't supposed to leave until the sunrise, but at this point I was too curious to leave it alone. I needed to know what would happen if we tried to leave too early. Once we made it to the door, Melissa tried to open the doors, but they didn't budge. The doors won't open, she sighed. Hold on, I have to lock the doors at 12 o'clock. Let me try. I walked in front, I pulled out the keys to the front doors and swiftly unlocked them. Afterwards, I tried to pull at the doors, and again, they didn't budge. No matter what I did, I push, I shove, it didn't budge. It was anticlimactic, but at least I know what happens if you try to leave early. I guess we're stuck in here until the clock hits 7:30 whenever that happens. I checked my phone, in which the time was 1990, which still didn't make sense. It was unfortunate because it meant that I didn't really have any means of telling the time. I'm sure a clock or a watch would have the same effect. I patted my pockets, making sure that I still had the tape secured. It's 4 o'clock a.m., so that leaves us just 3 more hours, she said, causing me to turn towards her in surprise and confusion. How did she know what the time was? Either she was telling the truth, or she was lying, but she wouldn't have a reason to lie, at least not now. How do you know what the time is? I decided to ask. She froze, presumably startled by my question. She turned towards me, shrugging with uncertainty and speaking with awkward, dragged-out pauses. Lucky guess. I was still suspicious of her, but I would have to let it go for now. Standing near the entrance in this nightmare of a Walmart was basically a death sentence, where any other weird creature hiding in the darkness could jump out at any moment. Then my body was suddenly shocked with intense pain from all over my body. I didn't pay attention to it now, but dropping for how high into an abandoned mine on my back must have obviously done some serious damage. And now the adrenaline was just running out. I grunted in pain, falling backward onto the ground. Hey, Jesus, you're more beat up than I thought, Melissa shouted in concern, crouching down beside me. The husky also ran to my side in response to my fall, whimpering in worry. Melissa helped me up, beginning to guide me somewhere. She placed me on a bed, covering me with a blanket. Here, lay here for now, and I'll go get you something to eat. She soon walked off, once again leaving me, this time with the husky, who I will now refer to as Chopper. I pulled out my phone. Of course, the time was still wrong, but I wanted to test something. Would certain apps work after 2 o'clock? The first app I tried was YouTube, but it only led to me a screen of a static. It doesn't make sense, but you know it makes sense. The next thing I tried was my camera, which surprisingly worked, though not very well. And of course, using any type of browser didn't work. Even browsers like Brave or Opera GX. I don't have any clue as to why some apps works while others don't, but it did bring me a sense of ease, even though small, that there was a chance of contacting someone in this death trap. After a while, Melissa finally came back, holding a bowl of what looked like to be ramen noodles. She placed it down in front of me, providing me with a fork. Here you go. I'm not really that great at cooking, anything, but the instructions were simple enough for me to follow. She chuckled awkwardly. Well, thank you anyways. But as I lift my arm, I was suddenly struck by that same pain again, causing me to grunt and freeze in place. Geez, you really aren't fit to do anything by yourself. She sighed, picking up the fork from my grasp. Let me help. No, thanks. I quickly refused. My body was already in pain. I didn't want my self-esteem to be too. However, despite my refusal, she pressed on. Don't be such a big baby, she snorted. Besides, it's okay to ask for help. I didn't say anything back, either out of embarrassment or I couldn't find anything to say. Or maybe it was just both. She brought the fork to my mouth, making sure that the noodles didn't drop onto the blanket. Reluctantly, I opened my mouth, letting her spoon feed me. The taste was, in reality, it was absolutely terrible, but the warm scene kept me in denial. This place had gotten so much brighter with the addition of Chopper and Melissa, and time would fly by without any of us noticing. The time was now 7. Me and Melissa were now starting to make our way towards the door when Chopper suddenly began pulling at Melissa. Huh? What's wrong? I asked Chopper. I think he wants me to stay for some reason. Melissa smiled, patting Chopper on the head. She reassured him that it will be okay and we would come back for him. Chopper just whimpered and sat there watching us go through the entrance. For some odd reason, he didn't want to come with us as much as I would have enjoyed his company. I thought maybe this place was his home. Anyways, we walked outside, the warmth of the sun beaming onto my skin. I turned over to Melissa, who was smiling back at me, but then her smile faded as she crossed her arms. Wow, it's so cold. She shivered. In response, I took off my jacket and wrapped it around her, hoping that it would give her some warmth. A desperate hope nonetheless. She didn't look to get any better, and I knew something terrible was going to happen. She turned towards me, shaking heavily. James, do you mind? I shook my head. Quickly after, she hugged me, placing her head near my heart. She let out a sigh of satisfaction, faintly smiling. "You're so warm." And just like that, she turned into dust, the breeze picking her up and scattering her across everywhere. I tried to hold back my tears, but I couldn't. Falling on my knees and sobbing, she was gone. Melissa was gone. And I didn't want to admit earlier, but I was gaining feelings for her. But I guess all dreams don't last forever. I'm so pathetic, aren't I? It's been a while since my last post. I'm not going to get too much into the details of what's been happening recently, but I fear that it has something to do with these posts I'm making. Let's get back to the story. It gets intense here. After a couple of minutes of pathetic grueling on the ground, I stood up, wiping the tears from my eyes. Soon afterwards, two familiar cars parked in the parking lot. Of course, this would be Carson and that freaky woman in the sud I never learned the name of. She got out of her car first, walking towards me with that smile still on her face. "Good morning," but before she could finish her sentence, I spoke up, interrupting her. "I quit." What?" I clenched my fists, feeling my anger grow. "I said, fuck you, I quit." I walked through her, shoving her to the side. I took off my security jacket and hat, throwing it on the ground in rage. Carson got out of his car soon after, making his way towards me. He held out his hand, presumably asking to be given the tape. I gave it to him. After all, that's what I came here for. He placed it in his pocket and put his hand on my shoulder. "You did good. You deserve a break." I walked past him in silence, deep in thought. So deep in thought that I would leave my electric scooter behind and just walk the way back home. The only thing on my mind being going back home to Shanks. After God knows how long of walking with my head down, I eventually made it home. I threw myself onto my bed, hoping to sleep my sorrows away. But sleep wouldn't come. Not with all the horrors I've experienced. So unable to find sleep, I got up to find something to do instead of laying in bed and crying about it. I called for Shanks, but he didn't come. I assumed he was most likely asleep and didn't bother him, seeing as he wouldn't wake up to most sounds anyways. Then I just recalled the cameras I had set up back at the Walmart. I'm an idiot for leaving them, but the footage should have been sent to my phone once it stopped recording. I went into the files, and there they were, 3 separate files of footage. Had no idea where the other footage was, but I chalked them up to just the cameras not uploading properly after the nonsense at 2 o'clock. I checked the first footage, which was the one I set it up at the entrance. In the top right corner, it displayed the time and date. Nothing happens in the first couple of minutes until suddenly, I can just barely see a frame of the moon stretching before seeing that faint image of flashing colors and shapes, now clear eyes. The shapes that would spontaneously show up stretched infinitely in all directions and points. Then, I don't really understand what happened next. All of a second, the camera was showing what I could only perceive as random locations across the world. Not outside of the Walmart, but as if the camera was actually at those places. It was happening too fast for me to note any remarkable places. What I can barely piece together from this rather random event was that my camera was somehow being transported from all over the world in the fraction of a second. And it wasn't just stopping at transporting there. At times, the locations would get dramatically smaller or bigger. At other times, it would be at locations I've never seen or heard about. Something that was a part of our world but was distorted thoroughly. A sense of familiarity, seeing but knowing this wasn't the same place. Something was wrong. Nostalgia, I guess you can say. In the top right corner, the time and date was constantly changing, a common factor between electronics. But then it would just stop, as in the recording would stop abruptly with a single millisecond of some loud sound being played. I couldn't help but be startled. Not just because of what was happening in the video, but because I no longer felt safe in my home. It feels like I had brought that madness and nightmare back into my own home. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, shaking my head in some attempt to calm myself down. It was time to view the second recording. I played it and waited a couple of seconds for something to happen. Soon, the camera suddenly began shaking as I can faintly see the flashing lights of colors and shapes once again. However, the recording was abruptly cut as the shaking had knocked the camera off and sent it twirling towards the ground. And well, that would lead on to the next recording. Like the other two, the footage starts off with nothing but silence for a couple of minutes or seconds before the random flashing lights of shapes and color appeared once again. However, similarly to the second footage, this camera would end up falling from the excessive shaking and was hurling towards the ground. But just when I thought the footage was going to cut, the screen went to static for a split second before the camera dropped comfortably in some sort of cushion. It was no longer in the Walmart. In fact, it was transported somewhere I could easily recognize. My house. This was my house. Using the video as a comparison, I could clearly see it had landed in my bed. But when I got to look for it, it wasn't there. I checked my files again, and this time there was a new file of footage, which should have been nearly impossible. My hand shaking, I hesitantly played the footage against my better curiosity. The video played where it left off previously in my bed. Off-screen, I could hear the sounds of shuffling, which I assumed had to be Shanks. But then my heart would drop in my chest as I see the camera being picked up by an unknown person. The person would then bring the camera into the bathroom and set it up, peering at an angle just right enough to where you could see the living room. Nothing would happen for a couple of minutes, and the footage seemed to be longer than the most, so I just decided to skip through it. I skipped through it about an hour or so when I would hear the sounds of my front door clicking and unlocking. I could feel my heart drop into my stomach as I can clearly hear the sound of my voice coming from my room. "Shanks, I'm home." The footage would continue playing, and after a while, I could clearly see myself sitting in the living room. My body was trembling at this point, and as I placed my phone down, not wanting to view the rest of the footage, I turned towards the room of my door out to the living room. That intruder had to still be there, just waiting around the corner for me to show up again. Hesitantly, I slowly walked out into the living room, my heart thumping in my chest. I turned towards the bathroom, my eye just barely catching a figure retreat into the bathroom. Their movement was awkward, almost as if they were leaning most of their body on the side before turning upright. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I ran to my room, closing the door and locking it behind me. I began dialing 911, constantly looking towards the door in fear that whatever who was there would break the door down. 911, who is it? Yes, hello, I tried to get the words out, but I found it difficult to do so. "Sir, calm down and explain the situation to me." I took a deep breath in, trying to compose myself once more. I cleared my throat and whispered in a hushed tone, "Oh, okay, I think there's someone in my house." "Okay, sir, stay calm and move somewhere safe. State your address, please." I looked back at the door before placing the phone closer to my face, trying to make sure I wasn't being too loud. "Sure thing. My address is Outback, and I live on Outback." "Okay, sir, the police have been dispatched to your location and will be arriving soon." I let out a sigh of relief as I smiled weakly. Thank you." But before I could finish my sentence, the voice on the phone spoke up again, and I noticed that they sounded a bit different than from before. "Is the intruder in the room with you?" What? I was confused on why they would ask this. Clearly, they wasn't in the room with me. When I turned back to the door, however, I froze, my entire being filling with pure dread. The door was slightly opened, just enough that its head could poke out and peer at me from the crack, all without a sound. I could now identify some of its features. It was barely human-like. Two black eyes without pupils that seemed bottomless, adorned with a pale white face without a mouth or nose. The rest of its body was enveloped in a dark black, almost seeming unreal as the light didn't bounce off of him. The voice on the phone repeated itself again. As this thing spoke, "Is the intruder in the room with you? Was the intruder in the room with you?" Instantly, I dropped my phone and ran towards my bathroom, hurriedly locking myself in. As I did so, I could hear the voice on the phone was now hysterically laughing as the sounds of feet slapping against the ground got louder. That thing out there began banging on the door, a red, ominous light suddenly basking my house in its terrifying glory. Black hands began reaching out to me from the cracks, scratching the door and walls in a terrible symphony. I frantically looked around for something, anything that could help me escape or at least fight back. Then my eyes turned to the bathroom window and I quickly began trying to open it to get outside. The banging and the laughing progressively got louder until I was finally able to open the window in my fumbling state and began running out into the empty streets. As I ran for my life, the streets became bathed in that red light and the sky became dark. I turned around, looking at my house as it burst into spiders that relentlessly began chasing after me. I ran as fast as I could, even while my legs were starting to give up. But just then, I could hear the sounds of police sirens in front of me, and within a few moments, a cop car had appeared. I was so glad to see them as I immediately ran up to their window. "Oh, officer, you have to help me. I'm being—" But before I could finish my sentence, I was interrupted as the cop spoke up, turning toward me. It didn't have in face. "Whoa, partner, you look like you're having a terrible nightmare." It laughed. I turned back towards the wave of spider that were now only a few feet in front of me. I had lost my will to run, opening my mouth to scream as the spiders made contact with me. But then, they suddenly disappeared, just like that. I looked around, my body trembling and shaking with each motion. Everything was back to normal. The streets weren't bathed in that red light anymore, and my house seemed to be completely fine. I could feel tears begin to well up as I looked down at my shaking head, breathing heavily. I didn't have anything to say. And for a while, I just stood there so disoriented from what just happened. A ringing sound filled my ears before it faded away to the loud down of a car honking. I turned around, recognizing a familiar car. It was Carson's car. He stepped out of the car, taking a few steps toward me. "What's the matter with you?" I took a deep breath, hesitating to speak for a moment. I, I need to go somewhere, man." "Where to?" "Just anywhere that's not here." He nodded, gesturing for me to get in, which I did so gladly. "I know a good bar that's not too far from here." He slightly turned his head back to look at me from the corner of his eye. I nodded in response. I was hopeful that drinking would calm me down and help me forget these terrible things that happened. The car accelerated with a slight shake as I looked out the window back to my home. It didn't feel like home anymore. One way or another, you could say that I lost my house. Carson turned on the radio, tuning into some random podcast from this conspiracy theorist. Nothing too much to note, though, just the usual ramblings of aliens and how the moon was alive. Though I would find it way much more believable with all the crazy shit that's happened. Conspiracy theorists sounded a lot less crazier to me when you meet terrifying creatures beyond understanding. And now I can't help but believe some of them might actually have encountered these paranormal entities. Back to the story. After about 30 minutes of driving, the car would come to a halt. Looking outside the window, I could see that we had reached our destination, parked opposite from the bar across the street. I got out a couple of seconds after Carson did, following him into the bar. The bar boasted a worn mahogany counter with a collection of stools. Shelves behind it showcased an array of liquor bottles neatly organized. Above us, dim pendant lights hang low, illuminating the polished surface of the counter. The walls were adorned with various vintage poster, Wooden tables and chairs filled the open space, bearing the scars of countless spilled drinks and animated conversations. Didn't look so far off from some of the movies I've watched. I sat down as Carson did, holding my head down deep in thought. Carson, meanwhile, ordered us both a drink before nudging me on the shoulder, shaking me out of my trance. So, what made you look so freaked out? Is it about the job again? I shook my head. Look, I don't even want to talk about it. I would rather just drink it away and hope that I would forget. Carson looked down at the counter, nodding understandingly. I get it. There's some things I would have liked to forget too. As he finished his sentence, the bartender placed two small glass cups in front of us before promptly filling them with liquor. Carson placed some money on the table before turning back towards me. Want to hear a story? I grabbed my glass cup and nodded. Okay, so this story happened all the way back when I was just a young lad, 15 or 6 to be precise. Summer had just started a couple of days ago, and I was ready to goof off with my friends. My dad, at the time, worked as a police officer, but somewhere in between 2 or 3 weeks, he would end up quitting after a specific case. Naive I ended up asking what had happened, and hesitantly he began describing the scene. He took a shot of his glass cup before continuing. He was dispatched to an unknown address after receiving a distress signal. When he got there, he banged on the door to try and see if anyone was inside. However, he had gotten no response. So he bust down the door. Immediately, he said he could describe the almost overwhelming stench of blood hitting his nose. The shit made him gag. He could tell that the smell was coming from upstairs, and so, of course, he would begin heading up there. Checking the first couple of rooms, there was nothing inside to note. But it was the last room. That last room that made him quit his job. I took a shot of my glass before placing it back down. So what was it? Carson shook his head, seemingly shivering at having to just describe the sight. In the last room, there was an unidentifiable mangled corpse, just laid out against the wall like an art piece. A one-time wonder, if you will. The victim had been fucking decapitated. The bone poking out of his neck and blood accompanied by masses of flesh running down his neck. My dad threw up on the spot. He said there was blood and cracks all over the wall, like the victim was dragged around like a rag doll and had his head smashed into the wall until you could see the bloody paint of his own face. The skin, specifically around the neck, was loose. It had looked the attacker had digged his finger into the poor man's skin and was beginning to pull it off, or worse, was beginning to pull out his collarbone. I could immediately feel my stomach begin churning as he described the gruesome scene. I felt like throwing up right then and there. Fuck, man. I know, right? However, it doesn't end there. There was more to that bloody, gruesome scene. In words above the corpse, written in blood, said, "How does it feel now?" accompanied with a simple smiley face. I had nightmares for weeks. I couldn't imagine how worse it had to be for my father in person. The autopsy report said that there was bruising around the neck, and most likely the attacker had somehow decapitated the poor guy with just his bare hands. He paused, taking a shot of his glass. I awkwardly chuckled, feeling my stomach churning up again. Well, thanks for the nightmares, man. He smirked back at me. Sharing is caring. Then his phone would suddenly start ringing, nearly falling off of the counter. Carson grabbed it before so, turning back towards me. Sorry I got to take this. I'll be back. No worries, I quickly replied. Before he left, he ordered a couple more rounds for me before turning and heading for the door. I picked up my glass cup, taking another shot. I was glad to had come out here. It had let me forget about all of the horrible things that had happened, even if it was only temporary. I picked up another glass, taking another shot. You have your mouth sewn, huh? I suddenly heard a voice beside me, and I turned to look to see who it was. I could feel my heart drop into my stomach as what I saw wasn't a person. It was this shadowy figure wearing a white jacket. Its limbs was twice as thick as mine. It was damn near almost as big as my legs. Its head looked like frozen flames that poked out of the back of its head, shrouded in darkness like the rest of its body. The only facial features I could identify was this completely white cartoon-like smile with sharp teeth that seemed to stretch to the span of its face, gleaming brightly. What? It picked up what was previously Carson's glass cup before flicking it into its mouth, chomping on it like it was a treat. Don't you find it hard to breathe with that mask? I looked down at myself before turning back towards the unknown entity in confusion. I, I have no idea what you're talking about. It shook its head, its grin getting wider. Drink all you want, but ignoring it won't make it any better. Your job isn't finished. I was even more confused now. It reached towards my glass cups now, chucking all of them into its mouth and chomping on them. I thought that maybe I had too much to drink, and I stood up to leave. Right before the door, though, I would hear someone or something shriek from behind me. "Don't ignore me, James!" I swiftly turned around, be startled by the scream. I thought it came from the entity from before, but as my eyes locked onto it, it was far worse. From across the room, a lanky, pale, deformed figure stared at me from across the room. It was tall and incredibly thin, so much so that I could see the faint outline of organs and ribs poking out from its skin. It looked so fragile and yet so domineering at the same time. Where the mouth was a mass of flesh that stretched upwards until it hit its eyes. That terror and dread was back again, just when I thought I had escaped it. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Without warning, the deformed figure suddenly ran towards me at a speed I couldn't comprehend, slamming me against the wall by my neck with its elongated fingers. I grunted, gasping for breath as I looked up at the creature. It held a knife over its head and swiftly brought it down without giving me a chance to recover. Just barely, I was able to grab the knife with my hands before it made contact with me, the blade hovering just a few inches above my eye. The blade came closest to piercing through my eye on multiple occasions, but in the nick of time, I was always able to push it back. But just then, the creature would end up suddenly disappearing, and I would just be left there, holding the knife within my hand. My eyes widened as I looked at the knife, then at the people surrounding me, pulling my hand back. I dropped the knife in shock and disbelief, my hand trembling. I wasn't sure of what just happened. I need to go. I quickly walked out the door, walking over to Carson, who was standing by the car. "What's wrong? You a light drinker?" He chuckled. I awkwardly chuckled back. I guess you can say that. I got in the car a couple of minutes before he did, leaning my head against the car window. I guess I had never thought about it before, but I had forgotten Shanks back at the house with that thing. I just hoped now that something didn't happen to him. After a while, Carson would then get into his car and start it up, the vehicle roaring to life. The car began accelerating, and I looked back at the bar until it disappeared from my vision. You know, the story didn't end there. Carson suddenly spoke. My ears perked up at this, turning my attention towards Carson. "What do you mean?" "After that incident, my whole neighborhood was on lockdown. Our parents advising us to not be out for too long in fear that the same would happen to us. Of course, me and my friends didn't listen. One night I was hanging with friends and riding through the dimly lit streets. After about 2 hours or so of just fooling around, we decided to see each other off. I was the last to see Darren, one of my close friends, off. I swiftly rode back home and exhausted, fell asleep. Until I would suddenly be awoken by the sound of my phone ringing. It was Darren. I picked up the phone and asked what was wrong, to end up calling me in the middle of the night. He told me that he was scared and that he saw a man standing outside his window, despite him living on the second floor. He paused, taking a moment to breathe. Eventually, I was able to convince that he was most likely just seeing things and that he should go back to sleep. Later that night, I would suddenly be awoken by the sounds of police sirens. By the sound of it, there seemed to be a lot of them and they were heading somewhere. I was unable to fall back asleep. So against my better judgment, I decided to see what was happening. I followed the sounds of the sirens, and to my horror, I found myself at Darren's house. I tried to get inside through the cluster of cop cars, desperately wanting to know what had happened, but they refused to allow me any closer. But that's when I remembered something. Darren told me of how the bathroom window was never locked, meaning he could sneak out and sneak back in, or how someone else could sneak in. So of course I went around to the back of the house and I snuck through the window. I ran upstairs as fast as I could, but just fast enough to be able to brush past through the cops standing around. When I ran upstairs to his room, I, he stammered, opening his mouth to seemingly say something, but nothing came out. You what? There was a message written in blood before, just like before. It simply said, traitor.